Good evening, everyone, from the University of Hong Kong, and welcome to the Regional Studies Association's Professional Development Webinar Series. My name is Bennett, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar. And I'll first introduce the RSA before leading into our wonderful speaker this evening. We have Mark Robinson joining us from Taylor and Francis. So for those of you who are new to the RSA is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development, and policy. The RSA supports its members with latest research, funding schemes, networking, and various publishing opportunities and spaces to grow research and careers. And in response to the current global crisis, the RSA board has put in place a number of exciting initiatives to support its members and the wider community. First, we have the Professional Development Series, which is this one that you're joining, which offers sessions on academic publishing, such as we'll hear today, networking skills, and career development. There's also the Regions, Cities, and Industry webinar series, which delivers monthly sessions by experts in the fields of regional studies, science, planning, and policy. Third, the RSA has also introduced a new small grant scheme equaling £4,000 or 4,500 euros, which funds research on how regions, cities, and industry address together the impact of coronavirus. So just a couple of housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded, and it will also be made available afterwards on the RSA Members Lounge if you wish to review the material. And if you have any questions throughout, whether technical or for Mark, please feel free to use the Q&A function. So now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today, who's Mark Robinson, joining us from Taylor and Francis in the UK. So Mark is Communications Manager at Taylor and Francis Group based in Oxford. Having previously worked for Springer, Mark has over 18 years of experience in marketing and communications for academic publishing. So in his current role, which includes the Taylor and Francis Authors Services Program, Mark's goal is to really help researchers maximize the impact of their work. So this webinar, which is called Promote Yourself and Your Publication, is going to cover various aspects of career development, and in particular, how to promote yourself and your publication. So here I'm going to turn it over to Mark, who will have a lot of material that will be very helpful for us today. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. Well, welcome from a very rainy Oxfordshire today, unfortunately. Thanks for joining the webinar. Actually, we've slightly changed the topic for today's presentation. We decided that promoting yourself and your publication is a rather big topic for one short webinar. So I'm going to concentrate today instead on promoting your publication, and in particular promoting journal articles. Now, some of the feedback to this excellent webinar series that has been organised by the Regional Studies Association is that people are particularly appreciating the practical tips that are being shared through these webinars. And so I have 11 practical tips for you today. I'm therefore not going to give you a long introduction about why it's a good idea to promote your publication, or about the challenges of raising your voice above the noise of millions of articles being published every year. I'm sure you know that already. So what I will focus on instead is introducing you to a quote, which I think is quite inspiring to begin today's webinar. Speaking from the perspective of a publisher, I can guarantee to you that we will do everything we can to make the work we publish as discoverable as possible. It's in our interest that people read the things that we publish. But with the best will in the world, we don't have the personal networks that you are building up with your peers. And we don't know your research inside out in the way that you do. So that's why this quote from Andy Meyer is helpful. He says self-promotion helps personalize the conversation. So it'd be great if you could keep this in mind. Now, we're going to cover lots of nuts and bolts stuff today, but do also be thinking, How can you add your personality and your perspective to the promotion of your research? So anyway, on to tip number 1, and that is to think about search engine optimization. And the key to this is really keywords. So what is it that you want, what is it that people will be typing into Google Scholar when what they want to find is your research? Those search terms need to be your keywords. So spend some time thinking about what those keywords should be. Think about the synonyms that relate to those keywords, because those keywords should be in your article title. They should be in your abstract and even in subtitles within your article as well. And so you'll notice that these are things that you can be thinking about, and you need to be thinking about, before you even submit your article. Now, once you've submitted your article and it's been published, then there are other things that you can do to help your article be found in search engines. Principally, that's making sure there are lots of links from other places on the internet to your article, and we'll come back to that later. But when it comes to keywords, make sure that you don't therefore rush your title or your abstract. As Mark Brundrett says in this quote, we would typically expect a strong title, a good title that really expressed what the article was about and made it clear to the reader exactly what the topic was. And it's amazing how often writers neglect to do that. So don't be tempted to make your article title a pun or rather cryptic. That can be fun, but it doesn't really help, I'm afraid, in terms of search engine optimization. Tip number 2, try some simple but effective promotional tools. So these are things that you can do as soon as your article is published. So for example, add a link to your email signature. Just a short sentence saying that your latest publication is out, and link through from that to the final version of record on the publisher's website. If you have a profile on your university website or any projects that you're involved in, make sure that they list your recent publications as well. If you're on any social networking sites like academia.edu or ResearchGate, again, link from your profile on those sites out to the version of your article on the publisher's website. And finally, if you're a blogger, and it's definitely worth considering starting a blog to share your research experiences. If you do blog, then that's a prime place to let people know that you've had a publication. Tip 3 is social media. This is a really powerful tool, and we see every year more and more people coming to our journal's website directly from social media channels. Now, of course, the types of social media channel will vary by region. So if you're based in China, you're likely to look at perhaps WeChat first. But it also varies by subject area as well. So do ask your peers, find out which social media types of social media they use. And do set up a professional social media account now. Don't wait until your article is published and then try doing it. Now, there's lots of advice I could give you about social media around keywords or using images or following the right people. But in the interests of time, I'm just going to share this one, which the social media team at Taylor and Francis use. And that's what's known as the rule of thirds. And the thinking is that fewer people will follow you if all you ever post on social media is the details of your latest publication. You want to try and keep that down to only a third of the posts that you put out. You also want to be sharing content that other people have shared, posted, that you think that your followers will be interested in. And also engage. So that's taking part in discussions online or answering questions that people will have and that will help you to be effective on social media. Next, talk to your learned society. How can they help you to promote the work that you've published? Now, don't forget, of course, that academic societies exist to bring researchers together and to help them to share with one another the things that they're doing, the things that they found. And they also usually have as a purpose increasing the impact of the research that's coming out of that community. So they're a great resource. So for example, does your learning society have a blog? Certainly the Regional Studies Association does. So could you perhaps write a piece for their blog, an accessible piece that introduces your research and then links out to your published article? Conferences are also a really good opportunity. Now, of course, not many of them are running at the moment, but when things get back to normal again, they're a great opportunity, both in terms of formal presentations, but also when you're chatting with people in more informal spaces as well. And if you're not used to going to conferences, if it's new to you, I definitely encourage the Student and Early Career Conference that the Regional Studies Association runs February, March each year. I've been a couple of times, and that's a really good opportunity to go to your first conference. Next tip is to share your data. There are lots of good reasons why you would want to share your research data. It's great for opening up the research process and improving transparency of that. It's great for reproducibility. But on a slightly more selfish note, I was interested to see this article that was published in PLOS One in April about the citation advantage of making your data available. And certainly the findings of this piece of research was that articles that are, have associated open data have a citation advantage of up to 25%. So if there's not an ethical or a legal reason why you shouldn't share your data, then that's definitely worth considering. Next, record a video abstract. Video abstracts can be a really accessible way for people to get into and understand your research. They're also great for anybody who uses YouTube as their primary search engine. But I'm not actually going to talk much more about video abstracts because coming up in this webinar series on the 8th of July, one of my colleagues, Louise MacLeod, who's our multimedia manager, she's going to be presenting all about video abstracts and everything you need to know. So do tune in for that. Next, consider a press release. Now, it must be said that not every article is newsworthy, although of course every author would want to see their research on the front pages of the newspaper. But if what you've done is a major breakthrough, if your research is very timely, or if it has implications for a change in public policy, then it's definitely worth considering a press campaign. It's worth considering talking to the press office at your institution and at your publisher. Now, what's really key here is that you should do that early in the process. Don't wait until your article is published. Really, as soon as your article's been accepted by a journal, that's when you should be thinking about this. Because if an article's already been published, journalists will consider it to be old news and it won't get picked up. Tip 8, consider whether your research is useful for policymakers. Now, this is a notoriously difficult group to reach because very often they don't have the time or perhaps even the technical knowledge to read a research article. But there are ways into policymakers. And actually we put together some guides, and you can see some screenshots there, about how you can reach policymakers. They are, the guides that we've created so far are around the UK and the European parliaments, although many of the tips that we've shared are relevant for other legislatures. So do have a look at the Author Services website if that might be useful to you. Next, use article level metrics to your advantage. There are lots of research metrics out there at the journal level, even at the researcher level, but you might be able to find some article level metrics that will help you in your promotional activities. And I want to particularly highlight alt metric. So on the screen there, you can see a colourful donut badge. That's the alt metric badge. What alt metric do is they scour the internet for references to scholarly articles, whether they're on news websites, on social media, policy documents. You can see this article here from Regional Studies a couple of years ago. It's been tweeted about hundreds of times, was in a couple of blogs, a news article. And if you click on the badge there, it gives you some more details about that. And so the great advantage is if you know who's already talking about your work, what type of organisations, what type of people, then you can go after more of the same and help to build on that traction that it's already got. Tip 10, make the most of publisher initiatives. Now, all publishers will have ways of helping researchers to promote their work. Here are 3 from Taylor and Francis that you might be interested in. First of all, use your free author ePrints. An ePrint is a link, a URL, which you can share with your colleagues and with your friends. And this will give up to 50 of them free access to your article if it's been published in a subscription journal. Similarly, STAR, Special Terms for Authors and Researchers. This is a program aimed at researchers in the Global South, and it gives them, it's free to sign up, and it gives them free access to the research articles that they need. So if there are people in your network in those parts of the world who would like to read your research, do tell them about STAR. And finally in this list, I mentioned earlier about adding a link from your email signature to your published research. Well, we can give you a snazzy banner to put in your emails. And my last tip is to make a plan. Now, I could have put this at the beginning, but I thought it would be useful for you to see the broad range of different options that you can pick for making your research more impactful. And the truth is, of course, that you won't have time to do all of the things that I've suggested. So it is a good idea to ask yourself about who it is that you want to reach, and therefore what channels would be most effective to reach them. So for example, if it is fellow researchers that you want to hear about your published research, then it's worth asking yourself, how do I find out about new research? And use those channels to reach others. Now, like every good plan, it will need to be flexible. Not everything that you try will be effective. And so you need to be ready to put your effort into those things that are. I would say that I'm sure you've been very diligent in the stages of the research process up to publication. So doing your research, writing it up, and you really need to bring that same sort of workmanlike attitude to the post-publication life of your article. Because if you do, it really will pay off. And finally, if I'm allowed, just 2 quick plugs of some resources that I think you might find useful. I've mentioned a few times the Taylor and Francis Author Services website. This has got more information about everything that I've talked about and much more. It takes you through the publication process from choosing an article all the way through to post-publication impact. And secondly, a 12-week learning program called How Researchers Change the World. You can sign up for this at any time, it's free, and you get an email each week with a new chapter of the program. There are 2 tracks, one for early career researchers and one for mid-career researchers. And it covers a range of topics about getting your research published and building your profile. And a couple of modules that are relevant to what we're talking about today. There's one on using social media to build your profile, and another on presenting your research as well. So it's definitely worth checking that out, especially if you find that you've got a bit more time at the moment to do some learning. So that's at howresearchers.com. I think I'll probably stop there and see if we've got any questions.
Wonderful, Mark. Thank you. That was extremely helpful, and I found myself taking many notes myself. We've had a lot of good questions come in, and we'll try and get through them. First might be one question about having a lack of affiliation, say in between the PhD and the first position afterwards. How would being an independent researcher affect the ability to promote one's publication?
Yes, that is a good question. And I acknowledge that some of the things that I talked about are an advantage if you're based in an institution, using the resources that they've got, for example, their press office, their media team. But at the same time, lots of the things that I've talked about, I don't think you need necessarily that support. You can have an effective and active social media presence, whether you're based in an institution or not. And actually, if you are between roles, then that's a really good place to invest your time in. And it can actually probably help you get your next role if you don't have something lined up already. Also, don't forget the tip that I shared about scholarly societies as well. So if you're not a member of an institution, this is sometimes the time that the society that you're a member of that really comes into its own. And you can use that as your base from which to build your promotions from.
Great tips there. Maybe one other question would be, is there any difference between promoting a book chapter and an academic peer-reviewed article?
Yes, yeah, good question. And I'm conscious that I very much focused on articles today. That's where my specialism is and my background. It depends to a certain extent on what format your article's available in. Most books these days are published in ebook form as well. Mm-hmm. There will be a definitive version if it's available in electronic form. There will be a unique identifier that you can share a link to that. So I would take in many ways the same sort of approach to it in terms of building a plan. There's no reason why you can't do many of the things I've talked about already, although it might be that there are some things that you can do in conjunction with the editor of the book or some other authors to bring together the different themes, strands, and perhaps, although your article may in many ways stand independently, stand by itself, that conversation between the different articles might help to attract attention from others.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And I think with so many book chapters online too, it's easier than ever to link to them and share them digitally. So
yeah, that's true.
A question that's come in concerns Google Scholar, and if there's any way to boost your article's ranking, say within the results if you type in a certain keyword. Is that possible?
Yes, I mean, I think that the tips that I shared about search engine optimization at the beginning definitely apply to Google Scholar. And so what I said about thinking about this very early on in the process is really important. What is it that they're going to be typing into Google Scholar when they want to find your article? And so making sure that those keywords are there. Quite how the Google algorithms work is obviously a closely guarded secret. I've certainly heard it said that Google Scholar only looks at the first part of a research article title. So if you've got a really long title, it's a good idea to make sure that the keywords that people are likely to be searching for are at the beginning in the first sort of 45 characters. That will definitely help. Things like citations, of course, are important too. And as you build up your publications, where relevant, and I should stress that bit, of course you can cite your own works as well, and as citations to your works build up by the effect of the work that you're doing in promoting your research, then that will help your rankings as well.
Interesting. Speaking of citations, have you, in your work at Taylor and Francis, noticed any kind of correlation between downloads and citations?
That's a tricky question. I mean, common sense would dictate, of course, that the more people who are reading an article, the more likely it is to be cited. But it's hard to prove because you don't know how many citations an individual article would have had if not many people had read it. Every article is different in a sense. It also depends on who's reading your article as well. So it might be that your article has implications for practitioners. It might be interesting to the general public. Now those are brilliant groups to reach. And if you do, then the readership will rise, but they're not people who are going to be citing your article. So it's not necessarily a set correlation between readership and citations. Although, of course, if the profile of your article rises amongst your close peers who are writing in similar areas, then hopefully it would impact citations, yes.
Excellent. Now we have a question specific to an early career researcher who has published, in fact, with Taylor and Francis, and they said that there's a number of views section on the top left of the article's webpage. So does that number mean how many times it's been downloaded or just how many times that article has been visited? If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense, yes. So for those who haven't seen it, so for every Regional Studies Association journal, which is hosted on our website, there's a tab which is called Metrics, and you can see how many citations it has had. You can see its altmetric attention score, and also how many downloads effectively it's had. Now, actually, what that refers to is how many people have accessed the full text of your article. So that could be the HTML page, or it could be people who downloaded a PDF of your article. So it will be both of those counted. It won't be people who've just looked at the abstract and then, for whatever reason, decided it's not for them. But everyone who's accessed the full text, they will be counted in that number.
Got it. Great. Thanks for clarifying that. Another question's come in, wondering if there's any surveys that show positive perception regarding the use of social media by researchers who might be taking it upon themselves to promote their articles. I think some people might have some reservations maybe about kind of being self-promotional, but is there any kind of research on that itself?
Well, the honest answer, I'm not sure about the research. I mean, I've certainly seen some pieces published which say that students' perceptions of their tutors increases if their tutor is active on social media. So if you're in a teaching position, that might be worth thinking about. So speaking as a British person, sometimes we can shy away from promoting ourselves. And I know that's true in many cultures, and many personalities have that same thing. I think the problem is that that doesn't always help you in the academic world. And you do have to be prepared to go beyond your comfort zone and shout about what you've done. And certainly that's true of embracing things like social media as well. But don't forget the rule of thirds that I shared with you. So if you're on social media and all you ever do is say about how brilliant you are and how great the research you've published is, then I can imagine perceptions of you might not necessarily be as warm as if you're also saying, have a look at this interesting thing that I've just seen somebody share, or engaging with other people, encouraging them, sharing resources with them that they might find useful. So there are ways of using social media that will boost people's perceptions of you, definitely.
Of course, great. And speaking of how we use social media, do you think that academics should try and speak in a slightly less academic language on, say, Twitter or Facebook, or wherever they're sharing the material, or what kind of language should they be using, I suppose, and what kind of register?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I said when I was talking about making a plan, it's worth thinking about who it is that you want to reach. So certainly, if you're going to use social media to reach practitioners, policymakers, the general public, then you need to speak in a way that they will understand. So you need to limit the amount of academic jargon, terms that are specific to your field of research. If your main audience is fellow researchers, then you don't need to explain those so much. But I think most people are more informal on social media. So I don't think you should worry about that too much. I don't think that if your punctuation isn't perfect, if you're using slightly more slang terms, I don't think people mind. I mean, it's worth definitely looking at following people that you respect and that you want to engage with and seeing how they use social media. So you don't want to stick out by being either formal or too informal. But at the same time, I don't think it's something that you need to get hung up about as well.
Okay, great tips. I know we're at the half-hour mark, but we have a couple of extra questions that have come in. So for those of you who need to leave, not a problem, of course, but we'll run a few minutes over and we'll be sure to wrap things up in the next 9-10 minutes or so. So just one other question has come in about maybe some of the kind of regulations surrounding disseminating your work or your data. Could you maybe speak to any conflicts of interest that might arise between wanting to be open and sharing your materials and research findings versus adhering to those guidelines and regulations?
Yes, of course. So when it comes to sharing your research data, it's becoming more and more common for people to do that. I mentioned some of the benefits for research in general, but also in terms of making your work known. And in fact, some journals are mandating it now, that you have to make your research available in some form or other, that you submit it to a repository in order to do that. Now, there are some exceptions where it might not be possible. So if the data doesn't belong to you, then you won't be able to share that. Also, if your data includes personal information where you would be breaking data protection rules by sharing it, then you won't be able to do that either. In many cases, the majority, I would suggest, there won't be a legal or ethical reason why you shouldn't share it. If you're submitting to a journal which uses double-blind peer review, which is where the peer reviewers don't know your identity reviewing your paper, you need to make sure that if you do deposit your data into a repository, and you'll need to link to that from your article, you'll need to make sure that that data is anonymous for the period of peer review, so that you don't sort of break the double-blind nature of that peer review process. Otherwise, I can't think of anything else, particularly in terms of regulations. We've got, sorry to keep plugging the Taylor and Francis Author Services website. We have a large section on there, all about the different data sharing policies that our journals operate. We have templates for data availability statements that you can put in to your article to say how people can access your data. And also some more technical details, some suggested repositories, all sorts of stuff. So that's probably the best place to go for more information about data sharing.
Excellent. So lots of good resources there to check out. What about maybe some broader advice you might have on helping early career researchers who might not have the most confidence yet in their work? What are some tips you might share for helping them to feel more confident about sharing their results in research?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting small is always a good idea. So within your institution, with your peer group, for opportunities to do that. I mean, I always say before you go to the step of submitting your research to a journal, it's a good idea to form some sort of writing group where you can share your research with others. And that gets you familiar with talking to other people about what you've done, because there is quite a skill in doing so. If you're immersed in the technical details of your research, it can be quite hard to summarize that in an accessible way, because you know all of the intricacies and all the caveats. Taylor and Francis sponsors in the UK a competition called the 3-minute thesis competition. And this is for PhD researchers to present in 3 minutes their research for a non-specialist audience. And it's a really tough skill to be able to do that. But what we hear time and time again is that people really appreciate that opportunity in the process of trying to boil down their research into 3 minutes. Really helps them to fix in their mind what it's about. And then once you've got that, that's something that you can share much more easily on social media. I talked about conferences. Again, really good opportunity to get used to talking about your research. There will be opportunities at conferences very often to present it. But actually, some of the valuable time is more informally when you're chatting to people about what you're working on, and you can use those as opportunities to refine how you explain what you're doing, and of course, crucially, why it's important as well, because that's often, for a lot of what I've been talking about, that's often the point. What is the relevance of this? Why do we, as people who aren't working on it, need to know it? And if you can crystallize that can be really effective.
Excellent. I think we have time for 2 more questions. One other one that's come in is, how many views might you expect an article by an early career researcher to receive? Is there any kind of ballpark figure you can give? Well,
so firstly, I don't think that whether the author is an early career researcher or not makes any difference. I mean, I think you can, in a sense, aim to have as many views as anything else. I mean, it comes down to your research to a certain extent. It's such a hard question to answer, though, otherwise, because it depends what you're working on. If you're working on a subject which is of broad interest to the general public, then of course you would expect to have a much higher readership than thing which is important but quite specialist. So I'm not going to give a figure on it, and I don't think that you should necessarily get hung up by downloads as well, because no two articles are the same, and the purposes of them could be quite different. So you could have an article which doesn't have many views but is read by people of influence, change policy as a result of reading your article and the recommendations that come out of it. And that could, you know, for humanity, that could be really important, even though it may never get read by thousands of people. So I'm going to stop there.
Very good answer, yes. Know your audience and know who you wish to target, I suppose, is an important reminder there.
Exactly.
Maybe our last question to end on is, of course, this is a big topic now, publishing in open access journals. How is that to actually disseminating and sharing your research and getting it out there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Open access is growing all the time, and it is a really good opportunity to make your work available. Of course, without any, the more traditional model, I suppose, is that your work would only be available to people who subscribe to the journal it's published in, or based at institutions that subscribe. Although, as I mentioned before, there are all sorts of initiatives to help wider groups of people access that research. But it does make sense, and it has been borne out in many studies that open access articles are read more than those which aren't open access. So there are the whole range of, I could do a whole webinar on different options and different routes to publishing your work open access. And again, we have a whole section on the Author Services website about how to do that. And you can certainly publish open access, either making the final version of your article open access, or by depositing an earlier version in a repository. You can do that with the Regional Studies Association journals. And definitely worth considering. If you can direct people to your final version of record and have that open access, then that's a really good asset.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for all of the insights and 11 tips you've shared. I think they've been really helpful for all the audience. I think we got through most of the questions. If yours wasn't answered, I apologize, but there were a lot of excellent ones. So hopefully it's been an insightful and engaging webinar for everyone. This is a reminder that the webinar is weekly. There have been a couple of questions about upcoming topics. You can check the RSA's website for the calendar. And I think we'll leave it there. So let's all give a virtual clap for Mark for sharing all of his tips today. And thanks for all you do and the services that Francis provides. Cheers.